So as coming back to the original slide, this is the slide that shows how everything is connected and integrated and interrelated. So how, for example, how education is informing other areas like the grazing research, like the extension, and those are informing the STEAM curriculum. So the interrelatedness. And then you heard about the key components that we're discussing today with the STEAM curriculum. And here are the questions that we pose to you as food for thought throughout our education presentations today. Each person presented one to you. So these are the areas we're hoping to get feedback from you on. You can either provide that verbally, anything you want to share related to these or additional questions you have. It will be helpful if you also type it in the chat so we have a record of it. But we have the video recording and audio, and we're all taking notes. So we value and covet your feedback. So let us hear from you.
I have a comment about the career videos. Just something that happened to me with my own experience. So I was on a project about a year or two ago that I'm happy that you have budget to make these videos look professional. I was on a project a couple of years ago that did not have that kind of funding, and we had undergraduate and graduate students interviewing scientists, the same kind of thing you're doing. But the students were using things like their cell phones to make the recordings, and we found out that a lot of the recordings just weren't good enough to even share in any kind of formal capacity. So it's great that you're going to have those professionally done. I think that's really important. The other thing was sometimes when the students were interviewing the scientist was just sitting at their desk in an office. And I think it would be a lot better if the interviews were done with the scientist, I don't know, in a lab or outside with some of the livestock or something that's a little bit more personal than just, sitting behind their desk.
Yeah, great ideas, Sarah. Thank you. And we may be calling on you when we're ready for that part too.
Okay.
And scientists, are you willing and able to have children interview you and talk about the exciting things in your work to be a superstar scientist for us?
I'm not sure about superstar, but certainly.
Excellent. And also be thinking about what parts of your work can you make really approachable and accessible to kids and families. So thank you, Doug.
Yeah, for sure. I think going over all these presentations, to me, I think I see a lot of links and connections that, like the slide I showed yesterday on the flow between research, extension, and education. I think that all these activities and tasks that you are proposing, I think will be really helpful at integrating. Well, I know we've been visiting with you about all this, well, from the pollinators, as we started from when even we're writing the proposals, but I see a lot of points in connection that we can integrate all these activities, with extension and research. So that's, from the, and then I think citizen science, that's a question you have there. I think that if we can learn from you, in terms of how we can implement this for our research sites and extension on demonstration sites, that'd be great.
And excellent points, Juan. And Kathy V said she thinks it would be helpful if scientists describe some of the really cool successes they've had that affected the community or the world around them. Great idea.
Yeah, Juan, I was thinking that I think, if you guys are having some sort of planning meetings or something, or notes from those, that would help me out to see how you guys, how we might be able to connect some of the stuff with the plans there. I think we definitely need some communication between us in order for me to know like what is okay for me to put out at the sites, and you know,
Yes.
where we could put these things and how many of them, those sort of things.
And actually, you know, if Jennifer McAdam, you know, if you comment on, there's some names that that they were suggested yesterday regarding the insects. You know, how a person here working and on entomology, and then that potential link, you know, that I think was created within this meeting when we had the presentations yesterday, so we can talk
Yeah,
about.
I've got his email. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you comment on that, Jennifer, and see how we can link that with Caitlin, you know, on education.
Yeah, and
I
go
did
ahead.
get a name yesterday from actually Juan's department head, Karen Mock, and it's someone who is at Utah State University who is working with our Division of Wildland Services, I think, who she said could perhaps on a separate grant that she could write, set up a way to do the bloom and pollinator side of things. So
That would be awesome. Yeah.
yeah, so we can definitely have a three-way conversation with that person, and because these plots are there, it would be a shame not to squeeze all of the data out of it that we possibly can.
Yeah. And Jennifer, I was wondering if you had any information about the bloom time stuff, so that we can think about what sort of plants to include in the garden so that we have blooms all year long for the foodscapes.
I know in the grant proposal, I don't have it in front of me, I think it's bloom time or green period, but I think it's bloom time is listed roughly. And so the information that I have didn't always include that. And so we're hoping we can get some of that information, you know, as it occurs in our plots, but that's a year away, of course.
Yeah.
So if I could make a comment at this point, it's interesting to hear the conversation develop today, because I think the question, like Caitlin's question just a second ago, is an example of sort of a bigger picture. I think organizational challenge that the team is going to have to work through, which is how to consistently sort of maintain and sustain the sort of cross talk between these three areas, like throughout the project period. So, you know, with such a large group, and you know, everybody's sort of carving out their pieces that they're the experts on, like trying to figure out not only how small groups within the research extension and education pieces work together, but then how that cross communication across those boundaries is also consistently happening is going to be really important. And you know, I think there are things that people will recognize from those other groups about their area, for example, that the folks from within the other areas may not immediately think about, obviously. So, you know, somebody who was this Beth just posted a question in the chat about, you know, making data from the GPS and pedometers on the cattle available as a resource for something that could happen more on the education side. And that's a really great example of precisely the kind of thing that, you know, would come out of having like an education person, you know, consistently involved in small group meetings with some of the research side of things, and, you know, vice versa with all of that. So that seems like that's going to be really critical, and especially at this initial stage of like trying to figure out where these concrete points of connections are between the three areas. Another idea that I really had about the mathematics application piece would be the life cycle analysis. I mean, there's some really great math and quantitative components to life cycle analysis, and especially if you're looking for things that might be more appropriate at a high school level or more workable at a high school level. Like, what a great way to bring in project data and really have students work with that, to engage in life cycle analysis, which is a huge like systems thinking kind of practice, and also quantitative and mathematical. So I'm sure you all have thought about like your general approach to like project organization and how that's all going to play out, but but it's clear that these are the conversations that are going to be most helpful for answering some of the kinds of questions that like Kathy's put up here on the slide.
Yeah, Corey, that's a great point. You know, thinking and then visiting with Kathy and Eric, you know, that the plan is to have monthly meetings with the three components, and then also Nina, I think she would join us from the evaluation part of the project, where we have these monthly meetings and we discuss, you know, all these links. I think that'll be more than anything. We'll be trying to do some of this integration at the PI level, but I think another great opportunity we have for these links, in addition to that, is having students be exposed. You know, any student that is involved in the project, either undergrad or grad students, or will have interns that getting exposed, or even within these monthly meetings, we can see how they can at least participate in some of the activities of the other components of the project, such that we get students representing this connectivity in addition to these monthly meetings that we'll have. I know that's and I know some people already express interest in, you know, these great learning opportunities for students studying even their grad level programs, or even as undergrads, being exposed to such a diversity of ideas and disciplines, compared to when they just start a really small project and they focus just on one component. So I think that is going to be a great learning opportunity for grad students, where they're not exposed to such a diversity of expertise and ideas.
And for the ambassadors, the undergraduate and the K-12. And like Juan said, we have these monthly meetings with Juan, Eric, me, and Nina, but also we plan to send the lesson plans when we have them in a more finalized draft form to the grazing scientist, to see where they can make connections with their work. In other words, to inform them what we're doing with education, and then ask them for their input on what connections we might make. So we're getting ideas from the education researchers, the scientists on our team, and then the classroom teachers, but also the grazing scientists. So hopefully that'll help, Corey. But if you have other ideas, what you hit the nail on the head. That's our biggest challenge. It's a huge project, and keeping those connections across.
I have just a thought on that. So when I agree with Corey, this is the biggest challenge, right? But one way to think of this, and if the scientists are open, is to think about ways that the education component can actually support your work directly. So it's not just an add-on. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So for example, if Jennifer, you wanted to try something new with the Foodscapes, but on a small scale, and you really didn't want to necessarily stick it out in the pastures just yet, maybe a school could try that for you and feed you back some data. I mean, if we had some things like that, it might create more of a direct connection where we actually have to rely on each other more rather than support each other.
Rita, this is also, I think that's what my thinking go to, because one of the things I'm thinking about, like on the school garden, at the beginning, you know, like I think the question we ask is like, how does this component, education component, tie back to more, you know, relate to the research? And I mean, like at the beginning, I didn't really see a very strong connection, but right now, you know, like after all the presentation, it could show a very small scales, like you mentioned, you know, like the small scales that could be as a garden size. But then, you know, like the overarching things in here is like because the school garden is also using by the pollinator, by the bee. So which is, you know, like a food sources for the bee. And the islands that we talk about, like a food, like that is also for the cattles, for the cows. So it's the same function like what we're trying to do behind that, but it's a small scale versus a big scale. So in the school garden, probably not only probably not sunflowers or like those bee-friendly garden flowers or something, but could probably monitor what Jennifer trying to do out the field, and then in a small scale, and then see whether how many the differences attract the bee, using the same grow the same species of the plants or something like that. So yes, you and I think I'm thinking the same thing as well. And if there's some connection in here, like the education components could be tied more like back to the research component here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Oh.
Sorry,
I-
Caitlin, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, I was thinking about, especially with the insects, because I'm always thinking about insects, but that I think that, the insects will be at a small plot and they'll also be at these big plots. But like, we're not going to have cattle, we're not going to have as much wildlife, those sort of things. So if we can do some really, similar insect sampling or something, some insect observations that are shared at the sites. I mean, people out there can observe flowers for 5 minutes, as that's a standard protocol for pollinator observation. And so then we could easily cross compare and really connect them with the data in the research fields, and then also what they're actually doing in the gardens.
I can offer a small example of what I'm talking about, of something that happened to me when I was back a teacher. So this is a while back when GIS was just starting. So the North Carolina Zoo had this really cool project where they were tracking elephants in Africa. And it was the standard project where they put out the GPS data on the trackers, and they had the scientists broadcast from the field to the schools. So that's what you kind of expect, right, from this kind of project, okay? So you have schools connecting with the scientists who are working in the field. Well, my bright students decided to take the GPS locations and do their own mapping of the elephants. And the scientists on this project were not using GIS and doing mapping. And so they made all these elephant maps for on their own, and then they sent them all to the scientists. Well, they were so impressed that they invited all those kids to the zoo to talk to them, to show them how they did it. The reason why I give this example is when the two parties rely on each other, depend on each other for the information, then you get that true exchange where they both feel like full participants in the project. If there are some ways we can think to make that happen, like create those spaces purposefully, I think that will work really easily for everybody involved, right? It won't be so much of like an effort,
I was also just going to say, going back to yesterday's conversation, I mean, the same principle could definitely apply to some of the extension programming as well, right? Because a lot of citizen science programs happen more in the extension realm rather than the K-12 education realm. And if there's opportunities for other stakeholder groups to contribute directly to research through data collection or even preliminary analysis or whatever, through more extension-oriented activities, that would be another example of this kind of a program model. Because I mean, I definitely agree with what Rita's saying and others that, the more everything is integrated and the more that different groups within the project are actively relying on each other for integrated project components, I think that generally is a good thing. So maybe just a thing to think about as part of the plan moving forward.
In other things I noticed about, like from yesterday is like Juan has a very systematically presenting, like the project developments, like what research actually should be involved, what kind of scientists should working on which parts of the research, and it's very systematically, laid out and helping us to understand what this is about and why it's important we have, like a Jennifer, like starting from the plants and then how the, like a digestive systems, and then so to me, that thinking process also is a very important part, like helping not just relate to the content, right? But also if you're gonna conduct the research, like, or learning from this, we really wanna, in the real world, like this project, the scientists are trying to see what happens out there for those islands, how can we design those islands, how those islands could be used by the cattle. And then so very systematically from various aspects of research and having all the scientists come together and then doing this type of project. I think this is also a very good, for students to exercise, thinking as well. If they wanted to study this, like for example, the school garden, I'm talking about high school level, not elementary school level. But then, like if you want to do it, so what aspects of, like the component you needed to learn, you needed to know in order to, go through this process as what scientists are doing right now. It could be a possibility, it could be possible, like if they identify some of the aspects and, like then they might be interested in those aspects and then connect it back to the scientist research, like this is what has been done, in progress. And then so that could be another way, like how to connect this piece, education with what scientists doing out there with the field. I don't know if I make the clear about my thinking on that, but it's just like I find it's fascinating to looking at how Juan, starting presenting yesterday, and then so from the step by step, and then this is what we're planning to do for collecting data, and that's that. I think that put a very clear pictures about, like this is how scientists are thinking, when they study some project. Yeah.
Great conversations and great ideas.
Well, I'd like to say, I think that scientists are kind of not necessarily taken so seriously at the moment. And that, as Weiwei suggested, if part of this communication with the public includes, science has to be done carefully and systematically. It's not just people pulling stuff out of the air and just throwing stuff out and seeing what sticks, And I think we've been through a period when we're starting to feel like we're not connected to anything, as just citizens of the US. And so I think this is a great idea. The idea of the scientific process being something that we communicate, and then we can put the pieces in place. And yeah, some of it is reductionist thinking, of course, but that's legitimate and that's important, and it does make for progress. So I just like to say 2 thumbs up. I think that's great. I'm glad you made that observation, Weiwei.
Yeah, and I think another lesson, or idea that I think we haven't discussed is this project itself, in terms of the way particularly livestock is viewed by some groups, nation and worldwide, that if we can, show our next generation of stakeholders, consumers, policymakers, that, livestock are part of this biodiversity that we are encouraging, and we think that it's going to make the world better, and not, as many groups try to see, very vocal groups that educate people, that agriculture and livestock in particular are negative to the environment and to individuals. We can be part of that voice that shows, from the kindergarten up, and parents, that livestock are part of this biodiversity, and that they can enhance and create diversity as opposed and help, reduce actually representing carbon sinks and reducers of environmental impact, as opposed to, with some vocal groups that try to show that these animals are doing the opposite. That's and it all depends on how we view and manage these systems, and we are all part of this. We are all managers in a way, so as opposed to just think that these animals are negative, just inherently negative. So I think that's if we can create that, from showing biodiversity, wildlife, ruminants, playing in a way that from the ground up, I think that will be making a really big change, I think, in our society, and in sharing us a bigger idea than just this project.
Yeah, and one, the research on psychology, well, first of all, we're looking at in terms of what do teachers, children, and parents know. So that's the content. And then what are their attitudes? And then what are their behaviors in terms of sustainability and biodiversity and ecological issues? And when we want to change behaviors and change attitudes, what a lot of people do is a lot of gloom and doom, and it's all bad news, to the point where people psychologically shut down and think there's nothing I can do about it. So part of the thinking is to give people something they can do that's manageable. So we're using the book Nature's Best Hope by Talmy, and we showed you examples of 6 raised beds on the school grounds. Our middle school wanted that model, and the 2 elementary schools do. Some of our middle and high schools don't. They don't want to dedicate, they don't have it, and they don't want to dedicate the space to it. So we have other models like container gardening and what's called forest gardening, where we plant in the existing landscapes. So it's giving people something manageable that they can do to make a difference. So, thinking on the psychological part, what can I do that will make a difference? And then showing them how that can make a difference. And a lot of our focus is on the pollinator conservation, because it's something we can do at the school.
Yeah, so, the schools will be focusing on something called habitat enhancement, which is basically related to the foodscapes, because the foodscapes and the islands of biodiversity is enhancing the pasture habitat. So that's the direct connection between the schools and the grazing on the pastures, right? So I think the key is going to be, as Huawei has said, having lessons about the research and how these pastures are becoming more diverse in order to, enhance those habitats for the benefit of the cows, which would be the benefit for the people because they eat the cows. So making those, those connections about how this is exactly happening. Ways to do that, I think, is really going to be important. When I've talked about this project to other people, that seems to be where they get hung up. They don't understand the connection between the grazing land and the things grazing on it, and how that affects them as a person.
Hi there. Let me open my curtains a little so I have some light. I haven't really known where this particular part might fit in, but as we've all been talking about this, I've really been thinking as a public relations person, and I wrote some notes down here so that I would remember them. it seems to me that the whole project needs a PR arm. A group, people who would develop a plan for marketing and sharing the project. They would identify venues, ways to get folks interested and involved, show ways for those outside the project area to implement some of the results and processes. The lack of this kind of public relations stuff seems to me to be one of the reasons that projects like this, once they're concluded, they just kind of fade away. So I'm thinking that this kind of marketing plan, starting right now, getting people interested in the process of how you put the research together and all the things that you've thought through, because they're, like Weiwei said, so impressive. And people don't realize that that's what goes into these things. So I think that, you know, this kind of would prolong the project after the funding ends, might provide more opportunities for additional funding, because people would just be saying, oh, that project, we know that project, blah, 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 let's give them more money. And one of the issues, of course, is that you probably don't have the funding for this, but you do at all of your universities probably have public relations staff who are supposed to do these kinds of things. And having worked in the public relations field, I know that it can be hit or miss, just like with any other expertise. It can be hit or miss whether you find someone who can really do what you want to do. I know that all these things need to be done, but I don't have the capability to do them. But I do have the ability to talk to somebody about them and brainstorm with them and help them through the process, because I've got all the ag background and I know farmers and ranchers and all that kind of stuff. So I could provide that kind of input. So maybe this wasn't the place to put it. I can type my notes up and send it to whoever would like them. But I just thought, since we were kind of talking about this larger picture, I just think that what you all are doing is so important for the future, for teaching people how to think creatively, how to see things in new light. And I'm just so excited about it that I'd like to help. So there you go. That's all I have. Goodbye.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, and for sure I will be picking your brain, I think, on that, because you are for sure like, yeah, so for sure you are successful at knowing your program anytime, anywhere you go, they know you. So that's, so if we can get, like some percentage of that regarding our project, that'd be great, getting some exposure that goes even beyond the project, in terms of issues relating to, smart functional landscapes that we can help create, and then the public understanding, as you say, that connection between biodiversity, and livestock. That's something that many people can't connect those dots, for sure. So that's great points, and for sure will be bugging you.
That's a very generous offer too, Kathy. As you mentioned, it's hit or miss with universities. And it seems to be a lot of miss in terms of, we have so many great things going on and nobody knows about them. So you've hit a very critical area, and we appreciate your offer.
Yeah, but I think, one way to at least start this, from the really simple way to, or move this into more from words to action, is that at least we can, commit that we'll be meeting, at least monthly meetings across all the components of this project, so we can make that commitment. And then if we rely this information to any one of us, from Nina, that she'll be visiting with you in terms of progress, or Kathy, Eric, or myself, we can integrate that into our discussion, into these discussions on a monthly basis, and then hopefully start creating these connections. Another point that we didn't mention is a website. I think Eric mentioned that yesterday in terms of, well, I think we need a website, and we have already a platform where we can have, updates, of course, all the videos, progress from research, extension, and education. We can have at least some component that so we keep everybody updated, and then also as a stimulating some connections, or shooting an email, or say, well, yeah, this is I see this this type of news that came on the website. Can you explain more? Or I know this other, have this contact that we're really interested in this, in what we have in the website, and then send that link. So I see that this website can work as a clearinghouse of our, ideas and actions, and keep everybody updated beyond just these annual meetings.
And in your packet, in your handout for our notes for today, the slide with all the 5 food for thought questions, if you'd take some time to look at those and then send us an email. Emails are in that packet too. Any other comments, questions?
Kathy, can you put that slide back up with our questions?
Certainly. Maybe.
Juan, will the materials from the conference, this conference, be available on the website? Things like, I mean, right now they're available in the attendee hub in some cases, but the chat and all of that, it would be nice to have that available maybe through the website once the conference attendee hub goes away.
Yeah, we'll need to put together like a report with summaries on all these discussions, and then of course having all this chat is going to be recorded, and then we'll have a document with all the questions and comments that we have in this chat, on top of like summaries for these open floors. That, yeah, we can for sure, we have already in the website a link to the meeting, but and then we can fill that link with this report for sure.
Some of the things to keep in mind about these questions: on number 1, over the life of the grant, we'll have pay, those are paid positions for 50 undergraduates. That's 10 per year, 5 in Logan and 5 in Price. So be thinking about undergraduate students to recommend from your departments who would be good to work and be a liaison between the grazing research and the schools, and making an explicit connection. And then the ideas about the STEAM career videos and math applications, you can email those to any of us. Any other thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, I was actually just going to mention one more thing, more on the mathematics applications for, again, kind of thinking more about middle and high school. One thing I might encourage the broader project team to think about and keep thinking about is how some of the models and visualization tools that are being used as part of project research might be translated for use in the classroom, either in a simplified form or as part of sort of a curriculum or something, again, particularly for high school students. I suspect there's a lot of resources that could be really valuable in a high school, learning environment, whether in, ag classroom or a science classroom or whatever. And one way to productively think about that would be to have the education folks, really highlighting the various standards that different things could address, and being mindful of where those fits might occur for different kinds of project resources that the researchers are using. And I bring this up from my own experience with a number of different projects where, these are really cool, cutting edge kinds of things that teachers and students get really interested in, and obviously can be gateways to the most contemporary science that's going on, even if used in a simplified or very much scaled back form. And I think the same would apply to some degree to the life cycle analysis that I was talking about earlier. Certainly the kind and depth of life cycle analysis that's happening as part of the project, is likely beyond the scope of what we might expect even high school students to do. But there's probably a simplified or streamlined version of that might be accessible to those students that would really potentially be a valuable educational experience for them to have. So just putting that out there. I'm curious to learn more about some of the research tools that are being used after seeing a lot of screenshots and things yesterday, but those just another, I guess, thing to think about.
Yeah, good points, Corey. One thing that I think someone mentioned this yesterday, teachers, well, people see as a one-way flow of putting data into citizen science, and the teachers don't necessarily know how to access that information. But it's for inquiry, it's hard for teachers with limited time. They're all limited with time. It's hard for them to be able to have kids gather data sometimes for a long-term, looking at long-term over a long period of time, but they can access it and download it, and kids can analyze it. So I think part of what you're saying, Corey, is to help them know what resources are available for use in the classroom. And that's part of what we're trying to do with the lessons, that not just doing a one-way flow of contributing to data, but how can teachers access it and effectively use it in their classrooms.
Another thing I want to add to that is we fully do not expect any of these school gardens to look alike. They will take on their own character based on the teachers, schools, kids, and the community that they're located in, okay? And that's a good thing, right? That's a very good thing. So helping the schools figure out how they can teach this meaningful science, but do it in a way that connects. So for example, the first graders may do something that the second graders then pick up on later. Or it doesn't have to be like one group does everything, right? So the groups within the schools too, around the garden and the timeline of the garden are interconnected. And I want to keep in mind timelines here, because I heard Juan and others describing that the pastures have a timeline, they have a cycle, right? Sometimes in the spring there's more to eat. Later in the summer, there's less to eat. That's similar with the gardens. They all have these timelines. So building in timelines, but then making them meaningful to the STEM that's going on in the school. So that's a different way of looking at science. It's looking at it more from life and real life, rather than, okay, today we're learning about the rock cycle, right?
So one of the reasons that I brought that up is because Larry, I think, posted a comment just a few minutes ago about, sort of illustrating and showcasing the science the way that it's done, as opposed to sort of the generic version of the scientific method that students still too often get in classrooms. And, you know, I think the version of the science that was presented all day yesterday probably doesn't necessarily look like a lot of students and even teachers might envision that a lot of science looks like. And, you know, that's an argument for engaging students and teachers in some of the authentic kinds of things that the scientific research of the project entails. And I think in this case, obviously the life cycle analysis is one of those, but just the sheer number of computer-based tools and visualization resources and models that are being used to analyze the data and work with the data, that might be something that you know, students don't fully grasp, and could be a valuable way of them understanding what science actually looks like for in the bounds of this project.
And that fits in with nature of science, understanding that it's not just the step-by-step quote scientific method that Larry mentioned in the chat. Yeah.
So are you thinking of maybe some specific lessons around some of these models maybe, or can you give some examples?
I can't without going back and rehashing a lot of what was presented yesterday, but I could envision that there could be lessons designed around, for example, the life cycle analysis. Maybe there's a mini module around life cycle analysis that's high school oriented. There could be ones, you know, from some of the other models and visualizations that were presented yesterday. I'd be happy to look at that in more detail if that would be helpful. But I think for now, this is more of a general thought, general overarching comment.
Mm-hmm.
Corey's point, I think there's plenty of opportunities, even on the end of calculating the number of animals that can be supported by the land, how much forage is being produced. I think there's a whole lot of math that we as scientists do that could certainly be incorporated into some of that math curriculum. I think there's quite a few opportunities for that, actually.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes before we have our lunch break. Any other closing ideas for education, burning questions?
This may be just a tiny little corner thought, but in your gardens, you know, if we're using perennial herbs and legumes, they're slow to establish and they do their thing every year. But you could also on the side do like peas and we have a wheat that matures really quickly that a colleague developed for use in space. And in fact, they've developed several different plant species that are sort of quick life cycle, but annuals. And so using the annuals that they can see even in the classroom during the year go fully to maturity, then might connect the students to what's going on a sort of longer term basis that would be appropriate to rangeland, you know. So I think that the whole thing kind of cries out for more extension involvement beyond just talking to ranchers, it seems to me. It seems to me that, you know, like there are certainly 4-H projects and all sorts of things, but I know these meetings just stimulate everybody's thinking and then you go back to the one little thing that you're supposed to be doing. But I think it's going to be too bad too if the meetings go on and on and on without a lot of this kind of creative input, you know. So I'm kind of looking forward to next year's annual meeting already.
It has been exciting, lots of great ideas. I think that's really important, Jennifer, especially, you know, it's going to take a while for things to establish, and especially not just the little kids, but especially the little kids. They need something that they can see where they can see the germination, you know, pretty quick and a life cycle pretty quick to understand. Yeah, great idea. And we're counting on you for guidance in those areas. Any other closing thoughts, ideas, questions?
I agree with Jennifer on that, and involving other crops with the gardens. A lot of the native forbs and legumes and stuff, a lot of the exciting things will happen, you know, over the summer months when the kids aren't there. Maybe we talked about that already, but a lot of the bloom and your pollinator activity that'll be going on.
Yeah. Well, we do have a garden manager working with us annually. So someone will be at the school to monitor and take pictures. And the kindergarten teacher was already talking about how they can connect one year of kindergarten to the next year of kindergarten. You know, they're planting something in the, they're planting something that their friends, their kindergarten friends next year will harvest. You know, so connecting the grade levels and articulating across will be helpful. Summer camps will be helpful. And then also that family and community involvement. So, you know, we do have some things going on, and we have thought about that, Brody, but a very good point on ways we can make that, be aware of it and make that explicit with those connections when the kids aren't there full time.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, it's been exciting and wonderful morning. I appreciate everybody's time and attention and participation. It looks like it's time for lunch. Juan, do you have any comments, questions, or directions for us, or Seth?